What is happening, everybody? Thank you so much for joining us live as we are going to talk to John Key of This Week in Fantasy Baseball on the Pitch List Podcast Network about his mock draft and really what it's like drafting from the number 2 spot for fantasy baseball leagues in 2025. John, thank you so much for joining me today.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Been looking forward to this for a bit.
Yeah, this is so much fun. It's my time really at the end of the year to bring on all these fantastic people from the Pitcher List staff. And John, remind everybody what you do at Pitcher List.
Yeah, so my main thing actually at Pitcherless is I'm a senior editor with the editing team. So we just kind of make sure that the articles look good before they come out. But then also, I mean, the big part is hosting This Week in Fantasy Baseball with Lee Keller, who unfortunately isn't able to make it for this pod. But yeah, we host basically a show that just covers everything that happened in the week. We talk about all of like the good player performances that happened in the week. We kind of give some streaming recommendations, and occasionally we're able to interview some writers from Pitcher List and just talk about their most recent article, get a little deeper dive into what they wrote about and why they like the players that they wrote about.
Yeah, it's a really fun podcast where you guys are talking about the things you might have missed, which is really a great way to catch up. Especially to bring on the writers to say like, hey, look, here's Process Plus that just came out. Like, you might have missed this thing. This is your podcast to stay on top of everything that's going on that isn't just the box scores, to really understand the cadence of the year. It's been a fantastic addition. And of course, the editors, senior editor, really are the angels of Pitcher List. You guys make sure that you protect what we're doing and look as good as we possibly can. So thank you so much, John. And we're excited to have you on today. You had the number 2 spot in this draft. And if everyone listening is not familiar with this mock draft, it's in the description of the podcast episodes. Go check it out, the full draft board. It's 12 teams, 5x5, Yahoo, 23 roster spots per team, 2 util, 3 outfield, no corner infield, no middle infield, 2 different Otanis. And what's so important about this mixed league is that it's all about filling in those bats as early as you can, chasing upside later on, understanding it's not a best ball league. But this is really the first ADP that we have for this league. All the other ones that you know from NFBC, those are draft and holds, 15-teamer. It is not the same ADP that you should be using for 12-teamers. And we are going to be doing more of these for the staff to get a real good, I'd say 3 at least, ADPs for 12-teamers specifically. And we go through all of these, talking to the players, talking about all 276 players who were drafted with the entire Pitcher List staff. And John, you had the number 2 spot. First question, of course, Did you want to have the number 2 spot for this draft?
So the funny thing is that both Lee and I this year, we were both part of TGFBI, and I think he had the number 1 pick and I had the number 2 pick. We weren't in the same draft, but like we had early picks. And I think both of us disliked being early in the draft. Part of it, I think, was injury. I think he invested a lot into Acuna. I invested a lot into Mookie. And obviously, we all know what happened with those two. But generally, the number 2 spot, I like it because you get the top, you get a top 3 guy for sure, right, at that pick. But then you just wait so long for rounds 2 and 3. And the players that are available in those spots are still good. But I generally like a better... like a higher average, so to speak. And for me, that means picking later in the first round if possible. I also just tend to like those players a little bit more. Usually they're, corner outfielders with a little bit of everything there. Whereas like, with the second, with your round 2 pick, you're kind of grabbing at the bottom of the barrel of like tier 2 players at that point. So, yeah, generally I don't like drafting that early, but I think it was a good exercise for both Lee and I just to kind of look at, what happens when you draft this early in 2025.
And from the number 2 spot, did you have a specific strategy going in?
Yeah, we wanted to go really hard on power. We didn't really want to chase speed. Like we knew we could add speed in like the middle rounds, in the rounds 3 to 6, so to speak. But we really wanted to emphasize power, and you saw that with our picks. Like we went Aaron Judge in round 1, we went Pete Alonso round 2.
Well, spoilers, John.
Sorry, yeah. But yeah, we went really hard on power, and that was our goal, to just kind of chase that and then fill in the speed later.
Right. Yeah, and that's actually interesting. You might listen to Jake Crumpler's podcast as well, where he was going after speed early, and he suddenly discovered that speed is more available than power in this draft. I mean, actually, there were more stolen bases last year than hitter and then home runs, believe it or not, which means that you can get stolen bases later on far easier than power. So I'm in agreement with you, and also generally, as I've repeated many times on this, that I think in your head-to-head 5x5, stolen base is only 10%, and also even if you are, as long as you have some competition in stolen bases, you shouldn't be trying to win the category. As long as you're 60-40, it's such a small sample each week that you have actually a decent chance of still winning it well. I think in home runs and RBI, you can just be defeated easily each week, even if it's still a 60-40. There's just more of a sample, really more instances of it that the gap widens more so. So yes, you went Aaron Judge with your first pick in the second round. First pick, second overall.
Yep.
Clear pick. I think a lot of people are going to be taking Aaron Judge second, maybe Bobby Witt Jr. It's really a top three. Did you take into account maybe Bobby Witt just for position scarcity at shortstop?
Yeah, we thought about it just a little bit, but 50 plus homer potential is just a little too enticing.
A little too much.
Yeah.
No, there's not much more to say about it with Aaron Judge. Could be every other year, of course, but no. It's pretty straightforward that Aaron Judge should be drafted in the first three. Take your pick. I might favor Witt just because of that scarcity. I know that sounds wild, but when it comes to comfort of a 12-team draft, the nice ability to get shortstop covered, second base covered, or third base covered, and have really the freedom for the rest of your draft to draft the best player available is a huge deal, because there's so many times you take picks that you don't like, but you have to at this point because you can't risk this being the last one before a tier.
Yeah.
And it will open you up to say, look, oh man, this guy's on the board, I can do this. Or you can just go ham on pitching because you're not really worried about which outfielder you get between rounds 13 and 19. Well, you might be like, oh, there's only 1 or 2 second basemen or shortstop, etc. But honestly, it's up to you guys. And there's a lot of people who don't really believe in that position scarcity in 12 teamers. There's more people available on the wire, etc. Personal preference all the way. And in the second round, you went Pete Alonso, which also is a scarce position at first base, because after Alonso, it's Matt Olson, and then it gets kind of rough when it comes to first base with Vlad Jr., Freeman, and Bryce Harper already selected. Because then it's Josh Naylor and Christian Walker and Vinny Pasquantino, Tristan Casas. Not really the best options you want at first base. Not to say that they're bad, it's just not ideal. And you felt, I think, with Pete Alonso, hey, look, we got really the next best first baseman. We know that we're going to go between Alonso and Olsen, because I'm imagining you don't really want to go for a Naylor later on.
Yeah, and I mean, part of this is also a nod to Lee being a huge Mets fan. Like we
had
to go Alonso there. Yeah, but it is surprising like how much first base has kind of dropped in quality, like compared to where we thought the position was at, like last year, even the year before. I think part of that is just probably, the fear mindset around Matt Olson's year, right? It just was not as good as we thought it was going to be. And all of a sudden, if, a top 5 guy is no longer guaranteed to be a top 5 guy, that's when you start chasing the other guys ahead of him. But both Lee and I are also big fans of Christian Walker. So if you missed out on that first base run, he is still probably more available in the later rounds. But we thought, we need the power. We need the consistency from Alonso. We always know he's good for at least 30 homers. It feels like every single season. So let's stick with him, and then we can figure out the other positions later on.
Yeah, I mean, his minimum is 34, and that was last year. And even 16 in 2020 scales out to be more than 34 across more than 57 games, right? So, yeah, you're going to get that power. Obviously, he's a free agent now. We don't really know at this time where P. Alonso is going to sign. There's an idea that it drops off, power goes away, and then there's not much else for Pete Alonso. It can be worrisome, especially the 240 average and 217 the last 2 years does suggest that, hey, maybe Pete Alonso is not getting better, but worse, strikeout rate going up as well. And Process Plus isn't the biggest fan of him. I mean, he got far better as the season went on. And Pete Alonso's Process Plus by the end was around 130. And it started around 110 and 120 or so. It took some time until about July for him to really get going in the second half. But yeah, Pete Alonso is going to be a big power thing. I'm really happy also that you mentioned Christian Walker because that's who I got.
Yeah.
Yes. Woo! Oh, well, I feel so vindicated. Okay. We're moving now to the third round. I love this pick. And with Mookie Betts, Ketel Marte, and Ozzy Albies already taken at second base, you guys came around second pick of the third round to get Jose Altuve. Talk to me about Altuve.
Yeah, this was definitely one of those comfort picks for us where we were like, we need a second baseman, and we both like Altuve. And after Altuve, it really drops off quick at second base. And so we definitely wanted one of Betts, Marte, and Altuve. And I was actually really hoping Marte was going to drop to us, but you took him, so
No,
that's what it is.
not a chance.
So yeah, we grabbed Altuve because there was like, there's no way we're going to wait for Semien to come back to us in the next few rounds. At that spot around our pick, a lot of outfielders were taken, a couple shortstops, and we just felt like getting a top 3 second baseman, in our opinion, was the better move rather than chasing, a shortstop or building some more numbers at outfield.
Sure. And I mean, I think Altuve just kind of gets a bad rap. Great average, especially great balance with Alonso and Altuve. 20 home runs in 153 games this past year, 22 stolen bases, 65 RBI, 20-65-22 is great, but it's not quite as much as you want, that 65 RBI total.
Yeah.
I feel that is strange at the same time. Altuve hasn't had more than 65 RBI since 2019. Actually, once to 2021. I apologize. 83 and then 74. Never really an RBI machine. It really depends against the Astros lineup at the end of it, not against, but of it. And then you have the runs, though, of course, going to be at 100 or around there. He's just really safe at second base. And after Altuve, there isn't much to go after. I mean, yes, you can say Semien. He lasted until the middle of the fifth, but it drops off so heavily, and it's why I know that I'm going to be targeting a second baseman in the first or second round. I really want to go after Betts, Ketel Marte, or Ozzy Albies. I will go after Altuve if I need to. I might go for Jackson Holiday later if I miss out on second base. I might go for Gleyber Torres as my backup as a hold in the meantime, but I think either you're going to go for one of those major ones and maybe Semien is in there, or you're going to essentially just punt it and then hope you find something on the wire, because I really don't feel as if there is a clear, oh, that is my guy I'm going to plug and forget at second base for the season. We're going to move to the fourth round. These are pretty simple, straightforward picks, and I like those. Judge Alonso Altuve kind of would be like what I would do in this spot. Willy Adames in the fourth round here. Willy Adames is a free agent now. And he had himself, oh my gosh, a season. He had a season, Willy Adames. This was one where it wasn't that impressive for the first half. He missed some time for a moment in the middle of it, and then he kind of still struggled through July until August, September, absolutely took off, peaked at a 130 process plus at the start of September. And you're confident, it seems like, that Willy Adames, wherever he lands, is going to carry that into 2025.
I'd like to think so. Playing in Milwaukee, which is like more of a pitcher's park. The fact that he was able to get that much power in Milwaukee was pretty impressive. Now, whether he stays there or goes somewhere else, the last place I want him to go to is Seattle, but I know that's been rumored a little bit. I think that power stays with him. And then I think the other thing is, we mentioned position scarcity with shortstops. After Adames, the next few were available were like CJ Abrams, O'Neal Cruz, Zach Neto. So it's a little bit of a drop off because like all the, top 5, top 6 shortstops had already been taken. And so it was maybe a little bit, I wouldn't necessarily call it a panic pick, but it was definitely one where it's like, we need to get a shortstop or else, where it feels like we're going to be punting this position a little bit. And yeah, the numbers are encouraging. Obviously, him being 30 years old is a little scary in the reality. Like, well, is he going to kind of retain this, or is this kind of just a flash in the pan? But I think it's possible. I think we've seen some steady improvement in him over the past couple seasons, and just with that power kind of coming through this year, feels like that's going to stay for a little bit if possible.
And it's something to be said that 3 of 4 picks here. Your Adamas pick, Teoscar Hernandez by PL Bot, then CJ Abrams, and your next pick, Oneil Cruz. That's 3 shortstops and 4 with Willy Adamas. And I understand that after that, Zach Neto, as you mentioned, Ezekiel Tovar, Jeremy Pena is in the 12th round. That's it, right?
Yep.
So Lindor, Henderson, Elio Cruz, Bobby Witt, Trey Turner, and Corey Seager all went in the first 3 rounds. That's 6 shortstops. And then you have these 3, so that's 9. And that does mean that somebody is going to have other shortstops. There's 3 open there. I don't want to be one of them. That's how I work. I don't want to have to think about this. It could be Tyler Fitzgerald or so if you want as a good backup later on. Jordan Lawler is interesting upside play. But that's something to think about. Speaking of Oneil Cruz, who's the next one, the 5th round. At first, I was really surprised you took 2 shortstops. But Oneil Cruz played 23 games in center field.
Yep.
So you can put him in the outfield. Was that the plan here for Oneil Cruz?
That was the plan. Yeah, he was going to be our outfielder too. This was actually the first pick that Lee and I probably disagreed on a little bit, where he was hoping maybe to go for an ace here. But both of us kind of decided we don't really want pitchers early. So the risk here of maybe taking someone like Garrett Cole or Dylan Cease, that's kind of what we were weighing at this time, and we decided let's go for the position player instead. Let's go for a guy who can slot in the shortstop if we need him, but he's going to be an outfielder too. Has 30-20 potential. The numbers, the advanced numbers weren't great for Cruz the entire season, which is probably the only thing that would give some pause. But again, this is his second full season. This was his second full season in the major leagues. So just more experience, I think, just is going to help Cruz kind of get to his ceiling, and hopefully we see that a little bit next year.
I mean, he crushes the ball. It's just about not doing it into the ground. 52% ground ball rate, 27% fly ball rate for Oneil Cruz this past season. And that's actually slightly worse than it was in 2022, 29% fly ball and 50% ground ball then. However, Process Plus really likes him. He smokes the ball, has a, what is the percentile on this? 97th percentile barrel rate. That is 15%. So you have to think at some point, there's a season that you won't know when, that Oneil Cruz starts to actually get lift on these balls, and all of a sudden it's not a 30 home run season, that's like a 40-45 home run season. So the ceiling is massive here, and even with that 25-20 season they just had for the most part, 21-22 I should say, that's still not terrible for your teams. I mean, this is the acceptable floor that you would have with Oneil Cruz. It's not fun. It's not you throwing your fist into the air, but it's not one of those complete flops. And 260 average, despite the 30% K rate, is a showcase of that power. It's why it's a 350 BABIP. That's not a luck BABIP. He crushes it so hard. You're supposed to have that elevated BABIP, and that will help him keep that hit rate high with that power. So for Oneil Cruz to have that extra ceiling and also have a floor that's worthwhile, that's what I talk about with pitching, but that's what you want with hitting too. And I will mention that Oneil Cruz does fit better as a shortstop just because of how limited it is, in clogging the outfield isn't ideal, but it's not like you got a bad hitter here and you have a positional flexibility option as well. It's just a bonus that he is outfield. However, I would likely have done Oneil Cruz in the 4th and then something else of a need maybe in the 5th. That's just how I think about it. Maybe a third baseman, which I think completely just did not draft. There's someone who has multiple eligibility.
We got someone who
okay,
shift over to the third base.
Good. Yeah. And he's going to shift over next year, you're saying?
I think he has some third base eligibility.
Okay,
so
good.
I think
we will figure out who that is and everyone else inside of John's draft after this break. So your 6th round, well, it's back to the outfield with Ian Happ. Talk to us about this Ian Happ pick.
Yeah, this is probably where recency bias comes in a little bit. For people who listen to my pod, I love referencing the auction calculator just as a way to figure out how players are performing. And Happ was the 14th best outfielder in Roto last season. And of course, the knock with Hap has always been inconsistency, right? He'll get hot, he'll get cold. But last year, he just was hot the entire season. Like, yes, there was like some stretches where it was slowly maybe declining, where he wasn't at the peak of his powers the entire season, but it was consistent throughout the year. He kept the power pretty much after midseason. I think it was consistent with what he was providing on a daily basis, and so that type of consistency, knowing he's going back to the Cubs, knowing that pretty much the entire Cubs offense is actually going to be intact for next year. Just a little bit more faith in him being able to reproduce that next year. And because the numbers were looking pretty solid for him, there's not really a reason to expect a ton of regression from what we saw this year.
Yeah, we saw a really good second half for Ian Happ. The first half, for at least the first 2 months, not so much. Power was just missing completely. A little extra a little extra in a few more holes in the bat, as he got from Switzerland. Of course, it was a Swiss bat. That's what it is. But then he found the power starting around July, 130 process plus peak, and then it turned into about 115 by the end. And the result was 25 home runs, about 90 runs and RBI each, 243 average. It kind of does feel like this is what he is, and that's fine. Ian Happ is a good example of a hitter. Like, you're looking at your team and go, okay, I just need to fill in the holes here with something that I know that I'm not really going to take out of my lineup. I generally don't go for that kind of thing when it's not 30 home runs and 30 stolen bases, that kind of thing. Which is like, Nick, come on, that's like a second, third rounder. Yeah, okay, fair. Very fair. One of the other is what I mean. This was a 25-13, but yeah, you're going to likely just have Hap in there for a while, because that kind of RBI and run total, 175 combined, is phenomenal. That really is something you can't find later on. So I'm all cool with having Ian Happ at this point. You also have Spencer Steer in the next round. That is the 7th round, of 20 home runs, 92 RBI and 25 stolen bases. You're fighting your speed here a little bit with some Hap, with some Cruz, and Steer back to back to back.
Yeah, so Steer was supposed to be our third base replacement, which is funny because now that I'm looking at his defensive stats, I realize he didn't play at third base in 2024. But in this draft, he had third base eligibility. I'll just
sure. He also has first base eligibility, 63 of them.
So he can at least play the corners. But yeah, Steer was kind of we need a third baseman, and also a little bit of, well, this guy actually hits homers and he steals bases at a decent clip. He plays in Cincinnati, so that's always a bonus to the power. Last season felt like it was a bit more of the Spencer Steer that he might be for the rest of his career, where 2023 was a really solid year for him. We saw him shoot up drafts. But last year seemed a little bit more kind of where we expected him to be. But the high walk rate obviously helps with being able to get stolen bases. And that team just seems like it's always on the brink of popping off, but they still haven't been able to put it together, which is a little frustrating. But
right.
Yeah, Steer's multi-positional eligibility is like super helpful. You can slot him in a lot of different places. And just being able to have that speed, and then with the potential power that comes with playing in Cincinnati, I think is just a nice little pick right there.
Yeah, it is surprising they had a 225 average. I mean, it's a 21% K rate. It's a low sub 10% swing strike rate. It's not like Spencer Steer just is a bad hitter. He's not, and I'm a little surprised to see that from Steer this past year. So I would imagine he's not a 225 batting average guy. Sorry, it was a 10.3% swing strike rate, but yeah, that's not, you normally see 14-15%. You'd see the higher strikeout rate. I don't really think that this is who he is. Now, it is 31st percentile barrel rate, 5%. And just kind of watching his process plus throughout the year, the power just went away in the second half. When I see massive changes and declines in power quickly, it does make me think there's either a process change with focusing on contact over power, or there's an injury involved of some kind. And I don't know. I'm a little curious about it. It is drastically different. And we're talking like 120 power plus early in the season, all the way down to 76 or so by the end of the year. That is such a big change, and it really brought down the whole entire process. Decision value is still very good there, and that there's his walks, and that's why he's not really striking out. I do wonder if there's something else to unlock there with Steer, but Steer is someone to really pay attention to for your league specifically. If you're able to get away with seven games at second base for eligibility, which Yahoo I believe does, that means you can put him at second base, and that is an option for those that are outside the Altuve gap or whatever you want with Semi and whatever after that cliff. Maybe Steer is that option for you. He also is first base, so there's more flexibility there. So Steer is a good all-around play. I mean, I see Luis Garcia Jr. going later in this round, and you could have Steer in some of those leagues instead at second base. So I think 7th round, where you have Kerry Carpenter, Stephen Kwan, Lawrence Butler as the next outfielders, the Christian Walker, Vinny Pasquantino as the next first baseman. I think it's a pretty solid pick. 8th round is coming, and we have Bryce Miller. Bryce Miller, I'm not necessarily against at all. I actually think I'm somewhat favorable toward him. He's around 30 or so in my ranks. However, guys that went after him, Logan Webb, Hunter Green, sure, but Yoshinobu Yamamoto, Grayson Rodriguez, Joe Ryan, Tanner Bybee, Bailey Ober, Aaron Nola, Max Fried, Sandy Alcantara, Zach Gallen, Spencer Schwellenbach. Why did you favor Bryce Miller above all of them?
I feel like when we thought about this pick, it was like a ceiling pick, and maybe 2024 was the ceiling, right? Maybe that was the best that he got to. But I mean, looking at the auction calculator draft, he was the 7th best pitcher, which again, like, it doesn't take into all the context of like the type of pitcher he is, but just based on raw stats, that's where he ended up. Of course, like with him, it's a lot of four-seamer, and his other pitches have to kind of work, and so it seemed to work for him in 2024. And if it's consistent, if he stays consistent his approach in 2025, we were thinking, if he's a top 20 pitcher in 2024, why can't he stay a top 20 pitcher in 2025? So that's where we were kind of going with that. With some of the names you mentioned, I mean, there's some concerns with like Yamamoto. We were thinking about him a little bit. Gray Rod, really solid guy, but we thought that Bryce just had a little bit higher than him of a ceiling. And both of us, for some reason, were just kind of not necessarily down on Logan Webb, but just with him, we saw Logan Webb as a guy who's like perennially like a top 40, top 30 pitcher, but maybe not a guy who could have like top 10 potential. And that's what we felt like Bryce had. So
sure,
that's where we went with him.
Yeah, I'm with you on the on Bryce over Logan Webb and Hunter Green. I think the main concern I have is, yes, it was a ridiculous season. 2.94 ERA and a .98 WHIP is just unreal. Over 180 innings. However, Bryce Miller had a sub 200 BABIP on his four-seamer, and that's a four-seamer he threw over 40% of the time. And I cannot get behind that. I think the best fastballs I've ever seen don't really do that. And he's also not great on the road. It's really been documented about how good Bryce Miller takes advantage of that, what I believe is the batter's eye in Seattle, and it just makes him so hard to hit there. While on the road, it's more expected of what we should see for Bryce Miller moving forward. So there are, to me, that's really a showcase that Bryce Miller has a really good fastball that is going to be a little bit worse. And the secondaries are just kind of there to get strikes and hopefully allow him to keep throwing fastballs. And I still haven't seen that real second pitch. However, I want to say the number 2 is in like a secondary. The addition of the sinker is great. I'm all for that with Bryce Miller. Big fan of that. But I won't see him really take off until I see that secondary, because you won't have that 25 to 30% strikeout rate that you need to really take that massive leap. Otherwise, it's going to be reliant on that sub 200 BABIP on the four-seamer, which should not be the case moving forward. But yeah, I like Bryce Miller. I think he's a good pitcher. I think he's not the greatest command guy, but he's a very good pitcher. And yeah, you're not going to drop him in your leagues this year.
Yeah.
And there's a giant glob too of just, to use Spore's term, from like, I want to say 18 or so to like 45. Like there are so many, and I find myself getting all of my rotation inside of that often.
Yeah.
Or people just pass on Shane McClanahan. Sure, I'll take him all day.
I was a little frustrated when I saw that pick come by.
Oh man, I was like, okay, how long can I do this? How long can I just not take a pitcher? And then Shane McClanahan, I was like, great, thank you. I mean, I did take him before you were able to take him. Would you have taken McClanahan there instead of Bryce Miller?
I mean,
No.
I love Shane, but the injury concerns are still a little too much.
Yeah,
for me
if we
to
had
take
more
him as my first
clarification,
pitcher,
like we
yeah.
do with Sandy Alcantara, of like, hey, threw 99 off in a bullpen in September, and then I'm like, okay, he's fine.
Yeah.
I haven't gone the same with McClanahan. However, it's a year and a half, and generally that totally means you're fine, and everything that we've read and seen is like, yeah, he should be okay and good to go for in September. Sorry, in March for the start of the year, and he's so good. I think,
he's great. Yeah.
I think we've forgotten how unreal Shane McClanahan was. It's Tarek Scuba, but a harder fastball and better breakers. That's what McClanahan was. Okay. We're going to your 9th round pick, and it's Hunter Green.
Yeah.
And so Bryce Miller, Logan Webb, Hunter Green. The same question. Why Hunter Green instead of all those other pitchers that I named before?
I think when we looked at Hunter Green, it was the resume for this year was really solid. At the fact that his strikeout rate went down, but he was still a top 20 strikeout guy. Like it kind of just maybe means his numbers in the previous seasons were really, really good. But didn't see any sort of deviation in how his pitches were performing in terms of like the swing and strike rate. And so it's like, well, they're still effective, even though maybe that strikeout rate went down. But then of course the ERA and the WHIP were incredible last year. I mean, he was a top 3 candidate for the National League Cy Young, in my opinion.
Not enough innings. Not enough innings.
Yeah.
150. You can't do that.
I know, but
no.
The numbers were still great. But regardless, I think like the fact that he kept his like the whiffs were still great for him, and that was with his stuff being not as good. I think the fastball went down a tick. Yeah, it did go down a tick this season. But it was still
97, 98. Yeah.
Yeah, it's still good. So I think because of that, we're like, well, if he's still 26, he's going to be 27 next year. He's not losing any dramatic velocity. The stuff still looks fine. And so we're like, yeah, that seems like a good pickup. And we've got maybe a little bit of consistency here now.
Yeah. The worry that I have for Hunter Green is twofold. One, with that fastball, to see a dramatic minus 15 hit luck on it as it came in, and I just didn't allow home runs somehow. Just so we understand each other here, in 2022, 16 home runs allowed off the pitch, 23, 12, and in 24 with more thrown, 5.
Yep.
He actually cut his overall homer per 9 in half, despite Cincinnati still being his home. He had an 89th percentile homer per 9 at 0.72, which is not going to stick. You just can't believe that homer over fly ball rate at 7%. And I don't really like quoting homer over fly ball rate unless it's an extreme, and this is one. I mean, that's not going to be it. That can't be it. And it's the only time I'll ever say, okay, fine, let's just say xFIP. What the heck? Mm-hmm. That's 430. Don't use xFIP, guys. That suggests that you will regress the league average, and that generally is not the case. But home runs allowed are one of the noisiest things when it comes to pitchers, and to see such a stark reduction is like, okay, I don't think that's going to stick around. In addition, I love using hit per 9, because hit per 9 is something that very, very, very rarely will stick under 6. So that's under 6 hits per 9. You'll see a lot of guys that generally stabilize around somewhere between 7 and 8. The aces you'll see are under 7, like 6.7. Like, ooh, that's a good hit per 9. And generally you'll see like most of the volume guys are like 7 and change with like a lower walk rate or so. And to see a 5.7 and 98th percentile hit per 9 for Hunter Green, no, not a chance in the world is that going to stick. So when you have some very obvious shallow numbers that are saying, hey, look, like this was ridiculous and remarkable and I can't believe it, I then look and say, okay, He did have a much better ICR overall. He did allow better contact in his favor by 9 points of a difference, 40% to 31%. That was 97th percentile. So maybe there is something to that hit per nine dropping. The fastball itself was just hit softer, 35% ICR instead of 44%. And there was an extra tick of IVB on that pitch, where he was able to get a little bit more rise, maybe a little bit more deception with it. But I just am so weirded out. No, it's not the splitter. 8% usage on that and not executed at all well. The slider is not the strike pitch that I really want it to be either. It's all just strange. And when I see strange, I go away for a guy who has been notoriously a not only a volatile pitcher, but can't stay healthy. So this was like the most healthy we've seen. That was 26 starts, 150 innings. It all is just like, I don't know. I get it that 170 strikeouts last season. If he does go 30 starts, then that can turn into 200. That has the potential to top 15, top 20. It is still really two pitches where the second one is not the Spencer Strider slider. It is significantly a step down, 61% strike rate last year, 18 and 19% swing strike rate, and not the 24% swing strike rate, like 65% plus strike rate. So I think it's a little too risky for my blood, but I do see how if that fastball's able to replicate that limited damage for Hunter Green, maybe that slider does take shape a bit more. Maybe there's a cutter or some other bridge pitch in there that's not the splitter. The splitter is not the thing that Hunter Green needs. It's not. He just needs strikes. Just throw strikes, not non-strikes. But yeah, is that kind of what you're leaning into? Pretty much that ceiling is just too good to let up.
Yeah, I think that's where we were at. Was ceiling there, and then just, I mean, I know the health is obviously a concern for Hunter, but it felt like, well, all the guys that were kind of drafted after him also were dealing with some injury stuff this past season.
There's always a wart you're going to find at this point.
Exactly. So
sure. 10th round, you jumped into Salvador Perez, one of the darlings of our PLV projections, entering this year. And he got all the at-bats as we wanted, plate appearances, and he crushed it. And it seems like you're expecting the same going for a catcher here in the 10th round.
Yeah, we love Salvi. We would have gone Cal here too, but I think for us, I liked Salvi better than Cal Raleigh, so that's why we went with him here. Probably didn't necessarily have to go catcher here. Like building up the rotation in this spot probably would also been a really good pick, but Zach Gallen got taken, so I think that kind of shifted our priorities a little bit. But, well, let's just go the next guy then that we want. So, yeah, and with Sal, I think with him playing more first base, right, that kind of just helps the longevity of his legs, even though he still is catching a lot in Kansas City. Just being able to be a little bit more healthy just means that he's just got more opportunities to hit homers. Also, that Kansas City team is just on the rise, so just more opportunities for runs, more opportunities for RBI. And the guy keeps hitting despite aging, so it's pretty impressive.
Yeah, he hasn't had a season under 20 home runs since 2014. And that includes 2020, 11, and 37 games. So yeah, he did it then too, guys. And 27 last year for Salvador Perez. You're right about first base. He played first base 49 times this past year to have catcher eligibility, 91 starts there. And that it's plate appearances, it's volume. Salvi's just always there. And I know that he's not young. He's going to be 35 in May. Oh man, I'm older than that. He's still going to be able to produce and help you out. I totally get it. And yeah, you're right. Cal Raleigh and Will Smith went in the 11th round shortly after. And I wonder if you are of the mindset of, hey, I want to go and get a catcher, or if it's the traditional, I'm just going to wait on catcher in my 12th teamer.
There's some catchers that I like later in the rounds. I mean, one of the shocking things was JT Realmuto in round 22 to me. Did realize he was still available up till that point. But I still do like kind of the high-end catchers particularly. I think the one guy that's maybe more mid-level that goes, after round 15 to me is Shea Langoliers. I'm a big Shea Langoliers fan. So if I skip on catcher here, he's probably the guy that I'm targeting in the later rounds. But I would say even after Cal Raleigh, that's where it kind of gets a little a little wishy-washy. Like Will Smith, like we saw a little bit of a step back from him last season. And then the names after Langoliers, it's pretty rough. Unless you believe in the Logan O'Hoppe Renaissance, then that's where maybe you go. But I think that's why I go Salvi. But I also don't love investing that high of a pick on guys like Adley or Yiner. Both Lee and I were big fans of Yiner this past season, but I think where his draft stock has increased this year probably puts him out of reach for where I like catchers in most redraft drafts.
Yeah, we have also, speaking on Real Muto, we're going to talk about him with Rick Graham representing in the pen. But yeah, he was under 100 games and essentially looked like he was going to be a 20 plus home run guy in 2025. We're going to talk about your next pick. That is another pitcher that I actually like more than both Bryce Miller and Hunter Green. We're going to talk about that after this break. So I like Brian Wu more than Bryce Miller. And it seems like you don't, but then again, you took Wu here in the 11th round.
Yeah, I think it was maybe just the idea, like taking Brian Wu earlier probably would have been a little more of a reach, I think, with how his stats look. And obviously he only pitched 120 innings. So, and the Seattle Mariners were just constantly moving him around and making his life complicated. So, that being said, we loved Brian Wu's stuff this past year on the pod. We were big fans of it. Every time he had like a good performance, I think we talked about him on the podcast. And so this was a pretty easy pick for us. I think once we got to this point and he was still available, it was like, yeah, let's go grab him, because it was going to be him. I think we were debating Gaussman at this spot. And I don't know if we were debating another pitcher at this point. And it was like, well, if we're going to pick between Wu and Gaussman, we're obviously taking Wu. So that's where we went with this. Yeah.
I'm glad you didn't pick Gaussman. I'll tell you that.
Yeah.
Definitely would not have agreed with that one. Just, I mean, Justin Steele is out there as well. I would much rather have that one. Brian Wu, he's a four-seamer sinker guy. He reminds me a lot of Zach Wheeler in great IVB and actually, I'm sorry, not IVB, but really low arm angle with solid extension. And to be able to spot it really well, four-seamers upstairs, sinkers go inside to right-handers. And he's still trying to figure out which of the secondaries are really going to take off. Between his changeup, sweeper, and slider, those combined just for 27% usage, all at 9% in 2024. So Brian Wu is going to be likely trying to find something that is consistent to be that put away offering against lefties and righties and to really solidify his approach to both. But for the most part, I think Brian Wu on a per game basis, I mean, you can just trust him to be a low ratio guy. That's who he is. His SIP rate was at 7. His walk rate was at 3%. He gets that low hit rate due to a 33% ICR, which I think is very believable given his command of his two fastballs. And what he's trying to do against lefties is feature the changeup more. 65% strike rate at 16% usage. It's fine. It's not really the pitch that we want it to be yet. While right-handers see the sweeper 17% of the time, but it only had a 56% strike rate and only a 17% swing strike rate, 22% put away rate. Not enough for me to really get excited. While the changeup, by the way, sub 20% put away rate. Again, not enough. So there is another level for Wu. And like I said with, say, Spencer Steer or with O'Neal Cruz, rather, I love getting guys that have a floor that you like, and then there's always upside for more. The downside is Brian Wu seems very fragile, and I would actually have him higher in my ranks if I didn't have to give him some sort of injury ding of, look, I think predicting injuries is really rough, and I'm not giving as massive of injury dings as I used to. But we have to acknowledge that the whole forearm thing drove us nuts. Is he hurt? Is he not? Hamstring all of a sudden would show up. Like there always was something with him. And sometimes that's just how bodies are. There's always something with some guys. So hopefully that's not the case for Wu when he's able to go 180 innings, because boy, will it be a good season if he does come through. Randy Rosarena, teammate for him this past year. How do you feel about this one in the 12th round?
Yeah, for this was just kind of wrapping up our outfield and getting a guy like Randy, who a couple seasons ago had, probably top 5, top 8 round potential. Getting him this late, I felt like was kind of a nice steal. And yes, he underperformed a little bit last season, but I think he had some really good moments in Seattle. And whether that sticks is a completely different question. But it was either him or Tyler O'Neill at this point, and we knew we wanted to round out our outfield. And Tyler O'Neill, even though last season was great, the injuries were a little bit of. It was kind of incredible that he played as many games as he did, and so you felt a little bit comfortable with Randy's floor compared to Tyler's ceiling, and that's why we ended up going with Rosarena here.
Yeah, Randy Rosarena, 20 stolen bases, 20 home runs. Still, even though he had the 220 average, you want to believe that there's more in the tank for him. And since getting traded to Seattle, it did feel like at first he had that initial surge really in the middle of the season was where all the decision values were better, the power was better. And then it did fall off dramatically by the end. The contact went down. And it does really speak to Randy as a whole. He's very much of a hot and cold guy. He gets in these moments of confidence, such good decisions, contact through the roof, power is there. And then all of a sudden it fades a bit and makes okay decisions, but then the contact doesn't come. And of course the power then falls too. It's strange. And you hope that middle, the top of that bell curve of the season he just had flattens out next time he gets there. And that's like a 120 RC, a process plus, which is the skills version of WRC plus, which is results. And it's why we like process plus more, because you want to talk about the skills, not just the output. The input is more important. And I hope it's there. You're right about the floor just being like, yep, we get this. This is cool. I do feel as if you as a team, Aaron Judge, Happ, and Steer, and also even some O'Neill Cruz, you don't really need outfield. And I know that you thought that Spencer Steele had some third base eligibility, so you didn't really think about that. But let's say you were redoing this here and you realized I don't have a third baseman.
Yeah.
Would this be the place that you go for a third baseman? Is there someone on this board, say like Alec Boehm, Josh Young, Connor Norby, Michael Garcia, Eugenio Suarez, Tommy Edman, Max Muncy? Is there someone that you feel like, okay, that's the guy I would go for? And is this where you would have?
So if we had known that Spencer Steer didn't have third base eligibility, and I had reins and Lee wasn't always debating me about this, we would have gone probably Eugenio Suarez in like round 16.
Okay.
Anyone who listens to This Week in Fantasy Baseball knows I love Eugenio Suarez. This season was a little dicey, but he did pull it out in the end with like a ridiculous 2-week stretch, and did get to the 30 home run mark. And that's always the risk you have with Eugenio, right? Is the consistency piece. But I would have easily waited for him to come around, probably round 15 or round 16, if we didn't have a third baseman at that time. Besides that, I don't really put a lot of faith in guys like Alec Boehm or Josh Young. Like they're fine, but Suarez's ceiling to me was just so much more higher than either of those guys, and so yeah, waiting for him probably would have been what we've done.
There you go. 13th round. Oh boy.
Yeah.
You knew this was coming.
Oh yeah, I knew. Yep.
And is this Lee being a Mets fan that you took Sean Manaea in the 13th round?
I think it was partially that. I think part of it also was we were looking at Manaea's stats as part of our kind of like look back on 2024 podcast. And it was our memory of Manaea was he had like one good start like every month. Like that's kind of how we felt about him. Sure. And then we looked at his stats. It was like, no, he was like consistently like really good the entire season. Not great, mind you. Like there were definitely blips here and there, but fairly consistent. And so I think this is where we were like, we like him enough that we'll take him here. Some of these other guys, I probably would have preferred Kikuchi over Manaea for sure.
I mean, he did go the pick before, to be fair, so you couldn't have taken him.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, some other guys, I definitely was kind of pushing for Reynaldo Lopez, but I felt like, again, that one season was like incredible, and is his floor high enough that you could take him there? So I think this ended up being like all right, Lee's the Mets fan, and we both like what Sean Manaea did this past season, so let's go with that again.
Yeah, I mean, your team does miss that veteran. It is
Yeah,
interesting
sure.
actually looking at this, and Mania fills that void.
Yep.
The thing is that the stability that a veteran normally brings. It is shocking to look back and see that Sean Manaea had a 3.47 ERA with a 1.08 WHIP.
Yeah.
Just to put that in perspective, the last 4 seasons for Sean Manaea, the best WHIP he had was 120 in 2020, 123, 130, 124 after for Manaea. But it was one of the seasons that he was able to actually start regularly, and he did make gains entering 2023 with the Driveline. The Giants didn't give him a very long leash in the rotation, then moved him out of it after the first couple of weeks or so. I don't really buy into Sean Manaea's arm slot change that we saw in the second half. That really saved his season. At the beginning of the year, I was struggling so much with him and Andrew Heaney. Do I put him on the list? Do I not? Do I take him off? Do I not? This I would just yo-yo him the entire time. And I eventually had to, of course, stick him higher, but what Manaea did is he went lower on his arm slot and then was able to nail the location of sinkers absurdly well, upstairs and more glove side than arm side. I don't buy that. That's a very in rhythm thing that if Manaea can go out there and do that again, that's awesome. Hats off to him. But I would be so floored if you got a 3.5 ERA, 110 whip, 25% K rate over 181 innings from Sean Manaea. That just, oh my gosh. There isn't, that would just be absurd to me. And I'm not saying don't draft Sean Manaea whatsoever. However, I see Robbie Ray right after. I say Seth Lugo is a safer version of Sean Manaea that went later on in that very same round, for example. So, it's not like the crop of pitchers of the opportunities out there are so great. Luis Teal, Shane Baz, Ronel Blanco, Gavin Williams are other ones that I would certainly be favoring him over him. Zach Eflin is just like Lugo in this way of a safer version, I think, of Manaea. Yu Darvish is there. Reese Olson, Nathan Evaldi. We're going to keep going. I'm just kidding. But it's all getting to that point of, well, yeah, you're not getting Sonny Gray or Carlos Rodon or Kodai Senga, right? You're not turning those guys down for Manaea yet. So I understand this is right at that point, but I would be surprised if you had to get Manaea in the 13th round of your drafts next year. Lane Thomas for the Cleveland Guardians. Now, Lane Thomas had a really ridiculous 2023, 28 home runs with 20 stolen bases, fell off to just 15 home runs, but 32 stolen bases in fewer games in 2024. Not too many fewer, 528 plate appearances versus 682 in 2023. Average fell to 37 as well. Do you feel as if him as a part of the Guardians is a sign that Lane Thomas is going to be much better and more consistent in 2025?
The coaching in Cleveland is great. And I think that average being that low was a little bit of an anomaly for Lane Thomas after the 2023 year, but it is kind of in line with where he was for the, for earlier parts of his career. So with him being in Cleveland, does that mean more consistency? I mean, I like to think so. I think the way that team operates, like they're very kind of focused on the way that they play baseball. And so if they saw something in Lane Thomas that they liked, then that means the team thinks that there's something that they can kind of unlock in him, or maybe improve in his average. Like they're not a team that necessarily chases power, right? There's not a lot of guys on that Guardians team that you would consider like sluggers besides Ramirez and Naylor. And so I think with Lane Thomas, maybe that home run numbers aren't necessarily going to get up to where they were in 2023, but the stolen bases should probably stay around the same. And I think that's why we grabbed him here, because we were looking to fill our last utility spot. And it was like, well, we invested a lot in the power early on, and we got a decent amount of speed from the guys that we got, but maybe we need just a little bit more speed just in case you want to, put someone in, or, you have a week where you're down a couple stolen bases and you want to put someone in for the weekend. That's kind of the way that we thought about picking up Lane Thomas, because we knew that we were kind of going to go really pitcher heavy for the remainder of the draft. And this felt like a good spot to take a guy that has still some upside.
So Lane Thomas, when he arrived in Cleveland, oh boy, he had just 4 stolen bases in 53 games. and 187 plate appearances, while across 77 games and far more plate appearances, 341, he had 28 with the Nationals. That is very staggering to me. And I do wonder if that is something from Cleveland. That has to do with just him not hitting as well. 253 average, for example, and a 209 following inside of Cleveland for Lane Thomas. I don't know. I do question it a little bit that the speed is still going to be there, but he is an upside play. Absolutely. We can't give up on Lane Thomas here. And it's an interesting time of the draft where you can start chasing as far as upside hitters go. There's so many go for him. Lane Thomas is one of them. And as long as he gets the starting gig in Cleveland next year, it's an interesting one that at least you'll be able to make a decision early on instead of just holding in like a Toby for hitters throughout the year. We have 15th round. Mackenzie Gore. Talk to me about Mackenzie Gore here.
We liked how consistent he was last season, even though it wasn't great numbers. I think looking back at how we had covered him through the year, it was like, yeah, there were some really awesome games where we talked about Mackenzie Gore and how good he was doing. But there was definitely some times where we actually highlighted his duds as well on the podcast. And so there was kind of some wishy-washy feelings about Gore, but we both felt like of the pitchers that were the starting pitchers that were left, it felt like he at least was a little bit more consistent. I know some of the names after him. I love Shane Baz, but I just don't know if he's ever going to get back to the elite ace that we were expecting him to be. Gavin Williams, I think both of us were a little bit down on Gav. Yeah, we'll get ready for that conversation. And I think both of us felt Darvish was like a little too old. So with Gore, we're like, yeah.
No, I mean, look, I look at your pitching staff and I get the whole old thing.
Yeah.
Okay, you're very ageist.
Yes, yeah, just a little bit.
Okay.
Yeah, so we liked what Gore did overall. We didn't like the fact that he was inconsistent throughout the year, but we did like at the end of the day, like his numbers were pretty fine on a season-long basis.
So Mackenzie Gore, first half, second half, definitely far better in the first half.
Yeah.
And his velocity dropped as the year went on. It was 97 out of the gate, and he has all the shape elements of his fastball that you dream about, really. The consistency of the secondaries are just not there. 142 whip is a product of his inability to complement that heater. Guys just went fastball hunting, were able to pick up the secondaries easily. And especially with that fastball being worse by the end of it, it just became destructive. He was also someone that would just have it one day and you feel so good, and then the next one it's bad. And
yeah.
I am very adamant about not rostering players that you don't know what to do with. Headache-inducing pitchers stifling the entire roster. They are hipsters, and I think Mackenzie Gore is someone that you will see him do well one day and go, oh man, I got to start him, and then he does poorly, and then you sit him, and then he does well, and so you start him, and then he does poorly, and you sit him, and it drives you up the wall. And meanwhile, you are not making a decision. You're just kind of stuck in this purgatory, and instead you're seeing your league mates pick up a guy, doesn't work, gets to get the other guy that you can't because you have no one to drop. You don't want those players on your team. That's Mackenzie Gore, in my view. That could change. He could very well all of a sudden figure out how to get his changeup working consistently, and there you go. Mackenzie Gore becomes a much different player. So if you draft Mackenzie Gore, you have to be very disciplined that you're going to let him go the first start. You're going to hope you see at least 96, if not 97 on that fastball. You're going to hopefully see a guy who is not doing a scatter plot, shotgun blast of fastball location. And you're seeing one of the secondaries look far better than they did last year. And if you don't see that, you gotta be okay moving on. If he does well the first start, regardless, fine. Go to the next one. But if he's not really showing that growth of skills, you should be expecting regression then, because that's really what Mackenzie Gore is missing. So I'm not truly against this pick of Mackenzie Gore in the 15th. I'm not doing it in that I place him with Taj Bradley of this. I feel like they're just going to torture me. While with Shane Baz, the curveball adaptation from the slider before, so good. The fastball is actually pretty close to what it used to be. The curveball is fantastic, and his command is way better than I expected to see. I think there's a lot of potential there. Great floor with room for more. Gavin Williams, the addition of the cutter is a really good thing. Absurd extension. Honestly, looks like a Garrett Crochet from the right side with 96, 97 velocity and excellent extension and a cutter for strikes. Plus, you have a curveball that sometimes, like in half of the games he's in, just all of a sudden becomes this absurd weapon and he gets all the strikeouts. I think there's a lot of growth to be had with Gavin Williams. We haven't really given him a proper chance yet. So I'm excited for that. And Yu Darvish, who went later in the round, Yu Darvish is kind of proven that the skills are great and they always have been. And at the very least, you can say, oh, he doesn't have it, I move on.
Yeah, I think the one thing that I don't push me personally away from Gav was just the swing strike rate was so low last year. And I don't know if you can attribute that to like injury or just like being young and not having all that experience. But I know that was like one reason why both of us were like,
I totally
think
understand
we're
that.
go with Gore here.
I think you consider it a lost season for Gavin Williams.
Yeah.
I think it's something where he was adapting into that cutter. I came in late. It was supposed to be about 2 weeks that the forearm was going to mess him up for, and it messed him up for longer than that. And he's okay. He's starting regular fastball velocity is there. You give him a full healthy offseason. I would rather at least take a chance there and say, okay, look, let's see how Gavin Williams is doing. Is he all ramped up as it normally should be and good to go out of the gate? And there he is doing his thing, right? And if he's not, then you can quickly understand and go. That quick decision to me is way, way more valuable. While also, I think it's really just coming down to just having a normal time and not being disruptive for Gavin. Those are my 2 cents on it. We're going to move to round 16, but before we do, we're going to take a quick break. So you finally, not take a third baseman now. You finally take a closer, and you take 2 of them. It's Alexis Diaz and Carlos Estevez. Why did you take these 2 guys here?
Diaz was like the only guy left, I think, that had like 20 plus saves last season. Even though they weren't like, it wasn't great for him.
No.
Like it was not a good season for Diaz. But it was one of those sort of like, oh wow, there are a lot of relievers that are gone. Maybe we should take one. So a little bit of a panic, but also like if you look at the rest of the names that come after him, it's guys that don't necessarily have a role, right? We don't know if they're going to be closers, and at least we know with Diaz, it's like he is most likely going to be the closers for the Reds next season. So there was a little bit of faith in that, like even if the Reds don't perform up to the standard that we expect them to be at, he's still probably good for 25 saves next year. And in a head-to-head league, that's good enough. So that's kind of the way that we approached relievers.
And with Estevez, how'd you feel there?
Honestly, that's kind of hoping he gets picked up by a team that needs a closer because he was a great pitcher in Philly, but he wasn't closing for them. And so this will obviously all clear up a bit more, hopefully by March, where we know where, guys like Estevez are, because he looked good when he was pitching, right? Really, really solid setup man. Just that closer role was always filled in Philly. So hopefully he goes to someplace that gives him that opportunity and he can pitch well there.
Absolutely. I mean, pretty much just circle this in as like, cool, I'm going to attack my relievers here. I probably would do it a little bit earlier because I think that in general, the B to C tier of closers are still good enough for your 12 teamers. But once you get to that kind of the D and the E ones, it gets very susceptible. I mean, there were some really good ones. Ben Joyce in the 19th round. I'm still upset at Jake Crumpler for getting that one because he's the closer and he looks absurd. And there he is. There's Urseg in the 20th round from Win the Buds Fantasy as well. But yeah, it's you just kind of circle this area and go, okay, closer time. Cool. Knock that out. And we're going to move on to the 18th round. It's Nolan Jones.
Yep.
Nolan Jones, who was in some places a top 50 pick or a top 75 pick entering this year. And boy, was it bad. 300 plate appearances and just 3 home runs. How does that happen after going 20 home runs in 424 plate appearances the previous season? John, you got to think like, look, the skills are still there, right?
Pretty much. Any place in Colorado, he's still playing there. We were kind of just saying like, hey, it was a sophomore slump for Jones. We know he's going to play half his games in Colorado. We know the power's there. And as far as like a last 6 rounds pick, like this is a guy who's on our bench. We're not committed to having to start him. If he heats up, that's great for us. We got a guy who can definitely contribute in a lot of different categories.
I mean, with Nolan Jones in 2023, Process Plus loved him. End of the season at 130. Power was up the entire year. And last year, it was a completely different story. Nothing was looking good for Nolan Jones. You have to wonder if there was just a nagging injury the entire season. And he obviously missed time with injury. This is a great pick. I love this one. This is a seal of approval for me easily. I should have been giving some other ones too. I want to give one for Spencer Steer in the 7th. I totally forgot. I'm going to give you one also for Brian Wu in the 11th. I love that one. So you have 3 of them.
Nice.
And sorry, I just completely slipped my mind. But Nolan Jones is exactly the kind of guy you should go for. Look, if he's the same, then you move on. But this was a top 75 talent. This was a guy that was going to be the dominant Rockies hitter. Sure, you could say that Toglia could be that guy too, but Nolan Jones was more impressive for his time in 2023. You can make the argument that this was injury. You have Toglia actually going the next pick too, which is kind of funny. So I'm going to, I'm all for this. Circle these kinds of guys. Know the ones that are out there. You can choose which ones you want between Nolan Jones and Toglia and Pete Armstrong and Jason Rodriguez and Jordan Walker, Kyle Manzardo, Dylan Cruz, Jackson Holliday, Parker Meadows, Taylor Ward. Like, you guys should all be aware of those kinds of hitters, because don't take the simple basic ones. Oh no, I need a third outfielder. Here's a guy who's going to give me like 15 home runs and 10 stolen bases or something. No. You should be dropping that guy. You should be chasing for the one that actually turns into a top 75 hitter, top 50 hitter for the year. That's what you're trying to find off the wire. They are there just like they are with pitchers, and you want to be putting yourself in a position so that you can get those. So go chase a guy like Nolan Jones. I love this one. And your 19th round pick, there's a theme. There very much is. I'm seeing this from Hunter Green. I'm seeing this from Mackenzie Gore. I'm seeing this from Nick Lodolo. Guys who have not put it together necessarily in the ratio department has for Hunter Green, but really are just favorable strikeout guys. And you're saying, look, they know how to strike out guys. If the whip comes around somehow like Hunter Green just did, this could be great. I mean, Nick Lodolo certainly has showcased that.
And I feel like Lodolo had, the weird year with injury as well. And not to say that like the seasons past have been elite for Lodolo either, but
the man waves at the crowd and gets hurt.
Yeah, yeah, that's true. But I mean, starting out your career with like a near 30% strikeout rate, and yes, it dipped down to 25% this season, but like to think that the skills are still there. And I mean, it's simplistic. It's simplistic maybe the way that we view homers sometimes. Like, homers lead to RBIs, runs, and average. Like, to me, like, sometimes strikeouts do lead to better outcomes and everything else. So if we can get those guys and hope they pan out, then yeah, that'll work.
Yeah, with Lodolo, it's all about, to me at least, how good he can spot his four-seamer and changeup when he's to right-handers. The curve is always going to be there. 20% swing strike rate against right-handers last year, 63% strike rate, low RCR. Is that changeup going to be something he can really depend on? 65% strike rate was actually pretty good for Lodolo this past year. But the fastball, well, the fastball is still susceptible. 6 home runs and just about 600 thrown. Only a 63% strike rate, so he fell behind in a fair number of at-bats. And a 41% ICR. It's very horizontal movement based. I'm actually a little surprised that he tries to go inside with it as much as he does. You have to nail it along the glove side, because this is the same reason why you don't want to throw sinkers to opposite-handed batters, really. Because if it leaks out, it leaks out. And all of a sudden now you're just going into the barrel of the bat. I do worry about that for Lodolo's four-seamer. And there are many times that this thing just goes towards the middle. Against left-handers, you would think that the curveball should just be game over. And this was actually a surprising turn here in the past season, where Lodolo's curveball, which was thrown 50% of the time in 2023, you have 37% usage for Lodolo's curveball against lefties, 53% strike rate. Oh, no. Oh, no. That can't happen. This is the pitch to throw against lefties. And his four-seamer, it returns a 3% swing strike rate against him. He should be throwing this actually I would say, inside like a two-seamer or a sinker because of its extreme horizontal break, the most horizontal break, 18 inches plus of a four-seamer. It's really a sinker. It's just the arm angle and everything like that. So, man, you gotta fix that one. And the changeup obviously isn't going to do anything. It's just fastball and curve there. He does technically throw a sinker, by the way, to lefties, and that has 19 to 20 inches of run. And he sometimes throws that inside, and that is effective. But to me, Lodolo is actually somewhat close. You gotta fix the curveball. You gotta to lefties. You just gotta figure out. Don't tug that thing all the way glove side. You have to be really consistent with that changeup to right-handers, and really don't worry about putting it in the perfect spot. Just really just getting it there. The fastball command is a little questionable, but I can see each of those things just taking small steps forward. I mean, the curveball is, I think, honestly, a bigger thing. Just throw strikes with it. Don't try to make it perfect. And this can work. This certainly can work. I think it's going to be very frustrating, though. I think it's just like the other guys of just, what am I going to get? Do I believe he's going to be able to do it the next day after doing it today? And I think just the way that Lodolo pitches, it means that you're going to see some volatility. I see him as a hipster, and that has me steering away from him, but maybe I'm wrong. I mean, we haven't really seen him have that opportunity for a very long year. So I hope we do this year. Just be ready to drop him, guys. Don't remember, value now is 2 times better than value later. Oh my gosh. Do not think about what it could be. If it's not now, for the most part, you just move on, unless it's like an absolute stud. Okay, cool. Anything else you want to add about Lodolo there?
No, I think that's pretty accurate. I mean, he's definitely a guy who, I think he's our 6th pitcher, right? Like, that's a guy that you kind of want to keep on your team, but you're also more than happy to lose him because it's not that much draft capital.
Well, I mean, I'm with you that the way you structure your draft here is you did go for more hitters in the beginning, in the middle of it, 10, 12, and 14, all hitters. And then you only have 2 more after that, 15, 16, 17, 19, 20, 22, and 23 are all pitchers. And you're pretty much figuring out what's good, what's not, and you should move on from it. I just want to express that you should be disciplined in that if Nick Lodolo doesn't work out, Mackenzie Gore, or maybe Cutter Crawford, your next pick, doesn't work out, don't be too hesitant to move on. And talk to me about this Cutter Crawford pick.
Yeah, this was a guy who both of us liked at the first half of the season, and then he kind of dropped off a lot, unfortunately. And I think this was, again, one of those potential sort of like, well, we like what he showed. It didn't work out the entire season. And that's unfortunate. And maybe part of that was like people did figure out the whole Boston pitching machine, and it all kind of fell apart for pretty much everyone in that rotation, actually, halfway through the year. But yeah, our thought process here was like, in terms of potential, we like him among the remainder of the pitchers. And yeah, let's just go with it and see how it works out for him. And maybe Boston kind of regains something again with their pitching coaching to get these guys to a level that they were at the beginning of the season.
So if you guys don't know this, Cutter Crawford has an Easter egg that no other player has. John, do you know what that is?
It's the cutter.
It's the cutter. We spell his cutter on his player page with a K. Everywhere it is. It cracks me up every single time I see it. Huge shout out to Jeff Niveen for making that happen on our player pages. One of our senior developers, the lead of that team. Yeah, with Cutter Crawford, it's 4-seamer, cutter, and sweeper for the most part. There is a splitter and a curveball that does show up. Both of those latter two, about 25% combined against left-handers. The curveball, though, very uneventful. 57% strike rate with a 32% CSW. It's really just there for called strikes, and not enough of them at 57% strikes. While the splitter does appear in games a fair amount, a 21% swing striker with a good strike rate. It's actually an effective one for him when he has it. And you know as well, hey, this isn't the game for it, and I'll push that away. Cutter was very good against lefties. 4-seamer was not. The 4-seamer has a ton of vert, but something I'm really understanding more this offseason is arm angle does affect not just vert, but then interpretation of how much vert should be coming to the batter out of the hand. And there isn't as much of a gap as I would want to see between the expected movement and where it ends up for Carter Crawford. Same for Nick Pivetta, which means that 19 inches of vert isn't as absurd as we might have thought. And so lefties actually crushed it for an 48% ICR, and that was 34% usage. While for righties, Carter Crawford features the four-seamer and cutter again, but now it's sweeper instead of splitter and curveball. And that sweeper is fine. It's not actually as amazing as I want it to be. 15% swing strike rate, 63% strike rate. While the four-seamer, once again, oh my gosh, 50% ICR. And I like the cutter for Carter Crawford. It is a very, very, very effective pitch. I imagine next year we might see him reduce the four-seamer usage, and we might see him start going sinker more as opposed to four-seamer. Now, he is over the top, and it would be surprising to say, like, Nick, what are you talking about? You should be throwing the four-seamer with the IVB and everything. Maybe it's just looking too obvious. Maybe it's making the sweeper not as hard to pick up when there's an obvious difference in arm angle. I don't know, but the four-seamer ain't it. It just ain't it. It can be a surprise pitch late in the count with that vert. Fine. Carter Crawford has to figure that one out. And he's not efficient. He's not one of those guys that has like that pitch that he's always going to turn to and it's going to work out. The cutter turned into one a bit, but that always kind of made me weirded out when it comes to Carter Crawford, and that 23% strikeout rate being not so incredible that the home run rate is there because the four seamer is so easy to hit. Yeah, it's just like a weird mash of you're not over the hump, Carter Crawford. You need to be something a little bit more explosive, and maybe he can get there. But I wouldn't hold on to Carter Crawford too long. I see him as that hipster who's going to go back and forth, especially if the four seamer is still there. But 20th round, just be disciplined. That's all I ask. Yeah, of course I'm going to go so deep on the pitchers. Duh, guys, come on. Oh my gosh. Jonathan India is next, 21st round.
Yeah.
Talk to us about India, a hitter. Thank gosh.
Yeah, I know, right? This was our Altuve insurance. Basically, it was like, well, he's been getting hurt a little bit more as the seasons have gone on. Jonathan India is a passable second baseman who surprisingly played his way into not getting traded for the Reds and still being able to start on that team despite all the infield talent that they have. And so he's kind of like the guy that just won't go away, and it works out. So yeah, India just kind of, hey, second base is tough. We might as well get two guys who we know start every single day and could give us a chance to succeed at that position.
Do you need second base insurance?
I think with Altuve's injury history, I think it would be nice. Like, and Altuve, the weird thing with Altuve is that it's not like an injury like a muscle pull or anything like that. You know, he gets hit on the pinky and breaks his pinky, or sure. Just like freak accidents more or less with Altuve. So not knowing what those are going to be, India felt like, well, we'll just get a guy who, can, if we need to, some guy to, put on the, if Altuve is injured, right, we don't have to search for a guy on the waiver wires to replace him.
But I guess my pushback would be, is India going to be better than whatever waiver wire option is at that time, definitively?
Yeah, that's a good question. Knowing how many second basemen were taken in this draft, like I think it was more than, I think we weren't the only team that took two, but I think there was some level of like, it's just bad all around. We could have maybe taken like an outfielder here or another pitcher. Probably would have taken another pitcher if we didn't go India here. But I think we were both thinking like, in the event that Altuve gets injured, we'll take India.
Sure. Yeah, I would. My personal preference is to say, look, at a certain point, the value gap of that hypothetical situation of India and whatever's on the wire is likely not worth the value gain that you'll have with that roster spot in the first couple of weeks. Because, the roster spot in April is far more valuable than the roster spot in June and July, in my view, because you're putting your hands in as many pots as possible to see who are the guys that are going to stick out. And generally in April are where those get revealed the most and picked up. Many times, of course, guys get hot as far as hitters go, or pitchers change throughout the year, and you got to be shifting it a ton. But we all know there are some major surprises out of spring camp. There are guys that just show up as the closer out of nowhere in uh, in April, and you just go, oh, well, okay, I got to get him on my team. You got to have someone to drop for that. And I would never favor India as a handcuff for Altuve. I mean, I'm just going to be assuming that Altuve isn't hurt the first 3 weeks of the year. And if it happens to be that way, that's the worst case scenario. I wouldn't think that India is going to be in your util spot, and nor is he just definitively so much better than anyone in the wire. That's how I feel about it. However, if you don't want to play that game whatsoever, just like, look, I just want to make sure I have this, then great. I understand that as a handcuff for Altuve. 22nd and 23rd round, you did take 2 more starters. I like one and don't like the other. Can you guess?
I'm going to guess you like Cody Bradford. You don't like Fetty.
Oh, that's very much correct. Yeah, Eric Fetty, very bad in the second half and just doesn't really have that great of stuff. He's such a Toby. While Cody Bradford's very interesting. Mr. Fantastic with extension and a good changeup. So tell me why you guys went after these 2.
Yeah, we really like Bradford, mainly because of how he started out the season, and then obviously he went on the injured list for a really long time. And then when he came back, it was a little inconsistent, but he had flashes of like that excellence that was like there for the first 3 starts. So we liked him as kind of a second to last round pick. A lot of potential there. Good strikeout numbers for him. The ratios are what they are, probably because of just he had less starts, but did have a chance to have that really big blow up. But really low walk rate, which is nice. And even though he's not necessarily like a power pitcher or anything, it was really good numbers from him for a guy who, I don't know if he came out of nowhere. He definitely came out of nowhere for me. So I'll just say
he
that.
certainly did. I remember in the preseason, be like, oh, there's maybe, and then like, nah, probably not.
Yeah.
And no, he's a 7 feet extension and 17 IVB guy, which is and then you'd see 90 mile per hour, like but what he does so well is he has a 93rd percentile PLV changeup. And when you think about Bailey Ober, this is like the same thing of 2023 Bailey Ober, Cody Bradford, of Bailey Ober going upstairs at 90-91 with a 4-seamer and then a super high PLV changeup underneath it. And that changeup 17% swing strike rate. And what's better than for Bradford than Ober is that lefties need changeups. Righties not as much. But if you have a stellar changeup as a lefty, you can go far, especially if you have a 4-seamer that you're able to throw in the zone and be effective with. And believe it or not, the actual 4-seamer has a better ICR than the changeup for Bradford this past year. So the question really is just then, against lefties, what is he doing? How is he dealing with lefties without this changeup? Really is the primary thing. It's a slider. It's not a good one. 54% ICR and it's 73% strike rate. Oh boy. So you don't want this. 47% striker, the strike minus ICR rate. That's so bad. So bad. It has to be at least 50%, especially on a slider. So he has to fix that. That's why he throws about 20% of the time against them. But if he does in some fashion, he figures out some way to tweak that cutter, whatever it is, to get through lefties. He does do really well against right-handers. So it's pretty interesting. Rangers should win some games. They're going to lean on Bradford again. He's an efficient pitcher. I think you draft Cody Bradford and then you realize that you don't drop him the entire year. So seal of approval for Cody Bradford. I think the velocity and having 3 first names, Cody Bradford. Yes, Ford is a first name. Is throwing people off, but no, I think there's actually something legitimate to what he does with that 4-seamer and changeup combo. He just needs one more pitch to get out lefties, and he's actually going to be consistently good for you. Eric Fetty, though. Why Eric Fetty?
Yeah, this was maybe one of the other mistakes in this draft. So we were debating between
That's Jose
Barrios, Nestor Cortez, and Eric Fetty.
I mean, not the greatest of options.
Not the greatest trio, no.
Yep.
And it was like, I mean, yeah, Fetty was not good in the second half of the season. And I don't know if we can believe that the first half was anything but a flash in the pan. But that first half ceiling was a lot of fun to run with, and we felt like, well, if you can kind of recapture that a little bit, this is a great last round pick. With Barrios, kind of know what you're getting with him, and he ended up not getting picked, I think. So you could still pick him up off the
And
wire
Brios
at
did
some
not
point.
get picked, and this Ranger Suarez didn't get picked either.
Yeah, Cy
Michael
Young
Waka
candidate.
didn't get picked.
Waka not getting picked, I thought was a little surprising, but
Yeah, that was to me as well. I'm just looking at it right now of other players that people could have considered. Andrew Abbott might be in there somewhere. Matthew Boyd. Not many other really appealing ones. If you want to say that, oh no, we should be going after Griffin Jacks. I'm curious what you think there, as the resident Twins fan. But yeah, not too many others. Ben Brown, David Peterson. Yeah, it's getting very tough. So it's really hard to judge the last round pick because really what it should be is a high upside, just like, hey, let's see how this goes. Maybe Tristan McKenzie out of spring, if that's your guy. Sure, Edward Cabrera is someone that I would like to go for because everyone says, oh, he's such a high walk rate, all this stuff. I've watched a lot of Edward Cabrera, and I can tell you that he is so much closer to not having a bad walk rate than you think. He's not one of those guys that closes his eyes and just throws the ball. It's actually a lot of nibbling, and there are many games where he figured it out for a stretch of just, I throw fastballs out for strikes. He's a slider that I think he should throw more. There are a lot of exciting things there. So there are a lot of guys to swap here with Eric Fede, but look, listen, everybody here, you can do better. Your life does not have to contain Eric Fede. Okay? Don't settle. Chase happiness. Have that courage to chase happiness. That's all.
Don't trust the feds.
Don't trust the feds. Yeah. Oh boy. But that is your draft. John, I can't thank you enough for being here. Can you rate your team 1 to 23? Where are you?
1 to 23. I love the bats in this draft. Now realizing post spec that we don't have a third baseman's a little tough, but
it is a little tough.
We'll find someone. Yeah, the pitching, I think, for me, I still like those top three guys, and it gets a little more interesting as we go down the rotation. So I think on a ranking of 1 to 23, I will give it. Are we assuming 1 is like the best, right?
No.
Oh, 1 is the worst. Oh, okay.
Yes.
Well, in that case, I'm gonna give this like a 16.
16. All right. And with other picks in this draft, which were the ones that you thought, oh, I wish we had that one?
Lawrence Butler in the 8th.
Yeah, that's pretty good.
One. Yeah,
I love that one.
I don't like how much I like the A's this year, but
this is something I talk about each year, is that generally offenses get better the years after they have like a bad year, like the bad offense, especially if they're young, generally gels a little bit better the next year. And yeah, you got Lawrence Butler, you got Brandon Rooker in there. It's like, this might actually be something, guys.
Yeah.
This might be something.
Yeah. So I think Lawrence Butler, we really wanted Mark Vientos, and we were not expecting to go in the 7th.
Oh, I was going to take him instead of Christian Walker.
Yeah.
I got sniped by Winslow Fantasy.
So we really, I mean, obviously Lee's the Mets fan, but I'm also a big Vientos guy. So probably would have taken him instead of Spencer Steer at that pick.
Yeah, that Spencer Steer pick is the one there. That's Lawrence Butler and Mark Vientos. So Ian Happ and Spencer Steer going to Lawrence Butler and Mark Vientos. I'm a big fan of those changes. I think that's good. But that's gonna do it for this one. With one final question, what did you learn, John? What are the strategies that you're going to institute in your drafts in March after doing this mock draft?
Yeah, I think the main one is second base is tough. And I mean, I think we kind of knew that going in, but after going through this draft and realizing like, oh, I really don't like Marcus Semien like early, but it feels like I kind of have to take him if I miss out on these top 4 guys, really kind of emphasizes, if you can, target that second baseman. I think that's pretty important. I think other things, this will change come March when jobs are a little bit more finalized, but relievers are getting more like top end relievers are getting more scarce, and I think this is something that we've kind of known. But as more more teams go to kind of a reliever by committee or kind of the fireman system, like we kind of have in Minnesota, it's a little bit harder to know where the saves are coming from. And us waiting till round 16, like it is tough. Like we got Alexis Diaz, who yes gets a lot of saves, but everything else that comes with Diaz is not fun. So, had we drafted a couple rounds earlier, getting someone like Michael Kopech or Ryan Walker, those are some guys who, aren't necessarily in the top 5, top 10 relievers, but they're guys who you can kind of trust to get a decent number of saves. Well, maybe not Kopech. We'll see what the Dodgers do with him. But yeah, so I think relievers, and this is something that I always struggle with every single year, is when do you draft relievers, right? That's always the tough part.
Yeah, that's something that you, especially in March, just do one mock draft, everyone.
Yeah.
I can't express enough. We do them here at Pitcher List constantly and with the community as well. If you want in on that, join PL Plus, join our Discord community, and you can communicate it. But you'll understand where the pockets are. And it will always be, for me, hitters are the big thing early. Pitchers are the ones rounds 8 through 12. It's just how it is. And I even look at mine and say, I had to get Colton Cowser in the 11th. Retrospect, no, I didn't at all. There are so many other outfielders I'd be happy. Pete Crow Armstrong in the 18th round, right? There's so many options. And that is where pitching is big. The cool. Then I can go after these other really exciting prospect hitters later. Great. At the very end, there's going to be a couple extra pitchers to stick around with. Like you can figure out those spots super fast. And I implore everybody to do their own mock draft later on. But that is it for this one. John, thank you so much for taking the time with us. Definitely go listen to John Key's podcast, This Week in Fantasy Baseball with Lee Keller. In the meantime, just enjoy Pitcher List articles with the nice touch from John as he edits them. But on behalf of John Key, my name is Nick Pollack, and may your BABIPs be low and your strikeouts high. Take care.